Picture this. You got an endless list of tasks to complete, deadlines to meet, and you're constantly busy. Yet, time just seems to slip away from you. Sounds familiar? Well, you need a tool to track, manage, and optimize your time. Luckily, tracking your time is actually super easy, thanks to a recent Notion feature release that is an absolute game changer, Notion Buttons. So in this video, I'm going to show you not just one, but the 2 best methods to track your time in Notion. So, are you ready to conquer time itself? Let's make every second count. That was a good joke, right? First method, track your time in Notion using buttons. The pros, it's super quick to set up and you can use it in pretty much any Notion setup that you already use. Cons, you can't really use it in a team environment. This is the result of what we're going to build together in the next 5 minutes. If you don't want to build along with me, then you can also click the link in the description and just download the template. But yeah, this is the simple setup where we just in this case have clients, but this could be tasks, could be projects, whatever you want to use it for. And then if you open any entry, you see we have our client in here and we have our 2 buttons to start and stop tracking. So if I click on here, it adds a new tracker, a new timer in here with the start time and indicates that the timer is running. And then whenever I click on stop tracking, it will stop it and then calculate the minutes tracked. Here, of course, we are within the same minute, so there's no difference, but right, if I would have tracked now, like, let's say 3 minutes, or let's put this to 55, yeah, then you would get the difference here, and then it rolls also up in here with the total time spent, right, so all the individual entries roll up here for your total time spent. So let's build this. Starting with an empty page, we need 2 databases. One for the main thing, right, in this case our clients, and then one separate database for all our tracking entries. So I just type /database and I will create my clients database, and then I will create a second database right below for my time trackers. And then I will quickly set it up. So in here for clients, I for now just want a relation to my trackers. So I look for the relation one and we will go to time trackers, show it on both sides. And then in the time trackers, we have our clients, and then instead of this one, we will need a start date time. So this will be changed to a date property, our start time, and then can just duplicate this one and call this our end time, perfect. And then one last thing that we need is a status for our tracker. So again, one last property, this time a select one. So tracker status, and here we will have 2 options. We will have either running or we will have paused. Great, and we can quickly change the colors so that running is green and paused is red, just to make it a bit more logical. And then we have our very basic setup done and can go ahead to create some buttons to start and stop our tracker. We start by going to a clients database and creating a template here. And we'll make this full screen just so it's easier to work with, and we will call this new client. And then in the body of the page, we want to first set up a linked database for our trackers. So I type / and then we have our linked view of database, and we will pick our time trackers. And we want to show this view, but we want to set up a filter where we have the rule that only the client ones, let me move myself out of the way, the client contains the new client page. This is a self-referential filter. If you don't know what it is, check out my Notion tutorial in the description. But basically what it does is that whenever we apply this template, we will only see the time trackers on this page that are linked to this client. So then we can hide this here, and we can also hide this client entry here because we don't need to see that. And then we have our database down here, which will show us all the trackers. So I quickly resize that. And then the next step is to add in our buttons. So for that, we just type /button. And this gives this button menu. Again, if you need to learn more about buttons, I have a whole video about that also linked below. But basically what we can do is we first can pick an emoji. So we want maybe the play button. Let's take this one to start it. So call this start tracker. And then we can add steps that should execute whenever we click this tracker. So what we want to do is whenever this tracker is fired, we want to add a new entry in here and make sure that the tracker is set to started. So we click on add a step. And first we want to add a page to a database. And the database we want to add it to is called time trackers. And the name for that property will be just like a time tracking. Whatever you want to do, it will be always the same name, right? You have limited options here to individualize it, but that's good enough for us. And then we want to edit other properties. First, we want to put a start time. So when did we start the tracker? now. This will dynamically fill in the time at the time of when you click the button. And then we also want to make sure that our tracker status is set to running. And last but not least, we need to make sure that we know, well, this time tracker is related to this client. So we pick client and we say, please connect it to this page. So again, like here, it's a dynamic variable that will pull in whatever page we are on at this moment. So then we can click on done and we can just test it. And to do so, we go actually out of our template and we just create a client quickly in here. So our test client. And if I open him up, I should be able to apply the template. And then I can, whenever it's there, I can click on Start Tracker and it should add that entry. Yes, perfect. So move myself again. We have our time tracking in, we have the current time, and it is set to running. So that's how we create a button to start our time tracking in Notion. Now the next step is, of course, to enable us to stop a tracker so that we actually have the end time as well. So we go back to our template, click on Edit, and add our second button. We add them like this for now, but then we add columns later to space it out a bit nicer. So again, we type button, and this time we can take the stop sign and call this stop tracker. And this time, whenever it is clicked, we want to make sure that our running trackers are set to stop and that we record the current in time. Now click again on add a step and we say edit pages in. And then we want to say edit pages in our tracker, time tracker database. And now here's the issue with why this method currently only works if you work alone in a workspace. Because we can't tell Notion now to, well, edit the tracker for this template, so only the, the trackers that are connected to this project or this client. And instead we need to set up general rules in the main database. And in that filter, the only thing that we can reliably filter for at the moment is for the tracker status, because we can't filter here for client for the current template page, right? It doesn't work the same way. You don't have the access to the self-referential filter, which means you're stuck with this slightly less reliable workaround, which means you can only always have one tracker running at any given time. So we go to tracker status and say is running. That means the one running tracker will be selected. And what we want to do with that is we want to move myself again. We want to make sure that the end time is recorded. So the end time is again the time of when we click the button, and our tracker status is set to paused. And that's it for here. So we can just click on stop, and then we can quickly lay it out nicer. So we click /call, and we want to create 2 columns. And then we can drag the start tracker into one column and the end tracker in the other column. And then we have them laid out left and right to each other. We could also resize this if we wanted to. But yeah, this should be good for now. And we can go again back to our client and we can open the client. Now you see the template of course doesn't update, but one neat little trick is if you delete everything inside a page, you get the option to apply template again. So we click again on new client, wait for it to load. And now we see we have our running tracker. And if I click now on stop tracker, this one should stop and should record the end time. Awesome, record the end time and it's paused. So this is our simple setup to create entries in here to record the actual time. So now all that's left is to actually calculate, okay, how much time did we spend on a single task? In order to do that, we go back to our main database, the time trackers, and create a new property. This one will be a formula, and this will be like the tracked minutes. And it's a super simple formula. You can find it in details also in the blog post if you want to copy paste it, but it's simply the date between formula, and we take our end date, and then we take our start time, and we want to have the minutes between those two. So click on done, and that gives me the 3 minutes that I tracked for this client. Last but not least, in order to also see on the main project how many minutes we actually tracked overall, right? If we have several entries, we want to create a roll-up. So again, plus roll-up, and then here pick the, it's called a tag connection, so that one seems wrong. And the property that we want to pull up are our tracked minutes, and we want to show the sum. So now if we have several entries down here, right? So if I just were to duplicate this 1, 2, 3 times, we have a total of 9 minutes tracked in our rollup. We can rename this to total time spent. And now we can work with that property and have it display in a gallery, like in the sample, or do any other sorts of calculations. Either way, we have our very simple time tracking system in Notion with the help of buttons set up. Moving on to method number 2, using Notion together with Toggl to track your time. Toggl is a well-known time tracking tool with a bunch of cool features and, most importantly, an API, which means you can connect Notion to Toggl and then use both in tandem to track your time. And don't worry, even if you never built anything before with an API, it's super easy and I'm going to walk you step by step through it in the next few minutes. Pros: you can easily use it in a team environment with several time trackers at the same time, and you have built-in analytics in Toggl. Cons: well, the setup is slightly more complex. But before we get to that, quick shout out to this week's sponsor, Guidde. If you're like me and hate writing SOPs and documentation, then Guidde will be an actual lifesaver. It's an AI-powered Chrome extension that will help you create documentation for your team in just a few seconds. Let's say you want to create some documentation for your team on how to create a self-referential filter. All you have to do is start Guidde by clicking on the extension, say capture, quickly explain what you want to do, create self-referential filter in Notion, click on go, and then go through the process. So I say, okay, new template, new client template, and then I want to create a linked view of a database, time trackers, filter, client, and then is connected to this new client template. Great. And then I can click on stop and wait for Guidde to create the SOP for me. And after a few seconds, Guidde has created an SOP for me, including the screenshots and explanations of what people are supposed to do. You want to give it a quick check, of course, because in particular with Notion, sometimes the overlay window, it gets a bit confused by this, right? So this one we wouldn't want, so we just click on delete and you can remove specific steps. We could add steps, right, if we forgot something, or we could rename it, right? So in this case here, we want to search for the correct template. So I click on edit and then I say select template name, match filter to the template name. And then that is updated. And once you're ready with everything, you can ask it to create a voiceover. So we click here in the bottom right on generate. And now it will even give me a voiceover version of my SOP that I can share with the team. And here's the result.
Learn how to create a self-referential filter in Notion. Click on the blue drop-down menu above your database. Click on the new template option.
Pretty impressive, huh? And the best part is Guidde has a great free plan. So just check out the link in the description, create your free account, and get started with creating documentation much faster than before. And now that we've saved us all that time, let's see how we can track the remaining time using Notion and Toggl Sync. How does it work? Well, couldn't be simpler. We have our time entry in Notion, and we will sync every entry that we have in Notion to Toggl. Then we can track our time using Toggl. We can start it from Notion with a link, but Toggl will do the main tracking. And then once we're done with the task, we will sync the tracked time back from Toggl into Notion. So very simple flow. We need two automations, one to take the tasks from Notion to Toggl, and then one that later will take the sync time back into Notion. Starting again with a blank screen, we will type /database to create our entries for our time tracker. So in this case, let's call this tasks. And in our task database, we can remove these two entries. And what we want to set up in terms of properties are 3 this time. So the first one that we need is one for our Toggl ID. This will be the unique ID of any task in Toggl. Then we need to set up as a second thing our Toggl URL. So we can take the URL property for this one and call this Toggl URL. And then last but not least, we also want a quick formula to help us a bit with our automation. And this formula will simply check whether we already have a Toggl ID to indicate whether we need to sync it to Toggl. So sync to Toggl, question mark. And then here, the formula will simply be empty and then the Toggl ID. So whenever Toggl ID is not provided, this will be checked. And then in our automation, we can simply say, okay, take all the entries where this is checked and please create an entry in Toggl for them. Here we are in the automation platform that I always use for these sort of things, Make. You find a link to it in the description. It's great. They have an amazing free plan and it's super simple to use with their graphic interface. And the first thing we need to do here is to pull in the information from Notion. So I click on the plus button and I will add my first module. So I look for Notion, check Notion, and then I want to search objects. Now I need to first set up my Notion connection. If you haven't done that yet, you will need to click on plus and the add button and then go through authorizing your Notion workspace. I've done it already, so I can simply click here on add. And then the other thing that you need to make sure is that Make has access to the specific Notion page that you use for this, right? So in here where we have our time tracking with Notion Toggl, you want to make sure that you click on the 3 dots and that you have and under connections, you have Make showing, right? I don't have it here, so right now make can't access this page. In my case, it's still called Integromat from the earlier days, but you will look for make and then add it to this page. And now the automation can read these entries. So our test task can now be found by make when we run this. The one thing we need to do first though is to select that database. So I click on search here, and what was the name here? I had this named task, or let's call this tasks for Toggl to make it a bit more unique. And now I search for tasks for Toggl, click on OK, wait for it to pull up, and then tasks for Toggl. I can set up the query parameters, right? So what am I actually searching it for? And I want to search everything where our sync to Toggl formula is checked. So I will go down where I find the formula, and then formula checkbox equals, and then we set this to true. Click on OK, and then we can just right click this to run this module only, and then it will pull in the information. And if we've done it all right, we see we found one entry, and under property value, under name, we see our test task. So that works. Make is now connected to Notion and pulls in all the entries that are supposed to be synced to Toggl. To do so, we click here to add another module. We click on Toggl track, and then we want to create a task. So we click on this one, and then we pick our Toggl account. Again, if you don't have one, you will need to click on add first to connect your Toggl account, and then you can map the information from Notion. So the name of our task will be our task name from, the name of the task will be task name from Notion. And our workspace ID will be the workspace that we are working in. So it will be this one. And then last but not least, we need to map also the project. So in my case, I will just use my project as the default one. Of course, you could build a more elaborate system where you, based on specifics in your task, right, you choose a different project. But for the simple use case, this is enough. User ID can stay empty, and we want to put this to active. Then we click on OK, and then we can start testing it. So move myself here again and click on run once. And now it should take our task from Notion and sync it to Toggl. So I click on here, and then I see, okay, it created this task, and we have now a task ID in a Toggl, and we could go to Toggl and start tracking something there. However, we want to do everything in Notion. So what we want to do is we want to create now in Notion, we want to update our entry with a URL that we can just click, and then it automatically starts the tracker for us, so we can automatically start that specific time entry. So in order to do that, we will click here to add another module, click on Notion, and say update database item. And this time we're going to take, again, our database ID with the tasks for Toggl, and we will update the entry that we found initially and that we just synced to Toggl. So I pick this one, and then in here, I will wait for it to load. And then the database item can be mapped to our page ID from the first module. And then the one thing that we want to update, or the two things, are the Toggl ID. So I go in here and I look for the task ID, this one, and then for the Toggl URL. Now the Toggl URL is constructed in a very specific way, and I'm going to show it to you on screen right now, and you can also download it, have it copy pasted with the link of the blog post in the description. The way it basically is you need to enter three variables in order to make it work. First, you need your workspace ID, right? So where it says workspace here, I'm going to remove that, and then I pick here my workspace ID. Then I need my project ID, so the project, again, remove it and pick project ID. And then last but not least, I need the specific task ID. So again, remove task here and then enter the task ID. And that will automatically construct a clickable URL for me that gets me directly from Notion to Toggl. Okay, so let's click on OK. And then we create another task in Notion to test it. And then we see whether everything works properly. To test, let's add another task in here, and then go back in here, click on run once, and then we should get our Toggl entry and then sync back to Notion all the information. So now we have here our Toggl ID and our Toggl URL, and I can just click on this URL and it will automatically bring me to Toggl with the task started. So you see my project, another task, the tracker has been started, and now it tracks until in here in Toggl I click on stop tracker, and I can of course then go back to Notion, right, and start it again, or I could start a tracker from here, and it will keep tracking that time in Toggl until I tell it, okay, now please take the time and sync it back to Notion. In order to do that, we need to somehow indicate to our system that a task is done, and the easiest way to do so is of course with a checkbox that simply says, well, done, question mark. And what we want to do is whenever this is checked, we want to again take the time from Toggl and sync it back into Notion. For this, we need a separate automation in Make. So I created a new blank automation, and here the first thing that we want to do is again click on plus, look for Notion, and ask it to again search for objects. We will again pick our sandbox database, and we will again pick our tasks for Toggl base. And in there, this time we will search for everything where done is checked. So we just wait a second for it to load, and get all the information in, and then we set up our query just like before. So here, done. And this time we need to look for the checkbox thing because it's not a formula. And again, we set it to true. Then we just run once to make sure it works properly and it pulls in the one entry that we have in there. Wait a second, and there we have it, our one property with the name of another task. Perfect. So then we add again a toggle step, and we want to say toggle track, please get me the information from a task. So we will, do search, I think it is, or is it get? Always forget that. Get a task, yes it is. Again in our Toggl account, and for the workspace ID, we can again just in the dropdown pick our workspace, and then for the project ID, we can actually just select it if we have only one project. And then last but not least, for the task ID, we will map to Notion what we have here as a Toggl ID value in our plain text. And then again, you can just run this once to make sure it grabs the correct task from Toggl. Before you do that, make sure you have some time tracked in Toggl, otherwise it will give you an error. But now I have it here, I have my task, and I see, okay, I have a lot of seconds in theory tracked, 12,000 it says. That's of course wrong. This actually has changed to milliseconds, but they haven't updated here. So this is actually the millisecond value instead of the second value, but it generally works. We get our values back. And our last thing to do is make sure that we add it back to Notion and update the time correctly. You know the drill by now. We add another module, this time again Notion, and we want to update the database. We want to again search for our tasks for Toggl entry. And then, by the way, if you don't want to build this yourself, again, also for this one, I have a blueprint that helps you with the basic setup for these automations in the description, makes everything a bit easier. And the database ID will be the page ID from the beginning. And now the only thing that we need to update is the time. And that tells me I actually forgot to add that field. So let's go in here and let's create a number property for our tracked minutes. Okay, head on back here and refresh that connection so that it knows our new field. Wait again for it to load, and now in our tracked minutes we can map this value. And of course, as I told you, right, this is milliseconds, so we need to do some calculations. We need to take that value, then we need to go to the math tab here and say divide by first 1000 to get it to seconds, and then by 60 to get it to minutes. Of course, you could also do in one operation, divide by 60,000. And then we click on OK. And then again, we move this over here. We run this one last time. And then we should have our tracked values over in Notion. Awesome. So we have 0.2 minutes tracked for this entry. Very last step, we need to make sure that we don't continuously check for the done tasks, right? Because in this setup, if we have now 10 tasks and they're all on done, they will continuously update these numbers even if there's nothing to update. So in order to make sure that once we have a time in here, it doesn't do it again, we click on here again and we create one last formula property. And this one will be sync time to Notion, question mark. And again, we will check whether our tracked minutes are empty. And only then do we want to do this. So now we have this here, and you see now that I have a time in here, it's unchecked. And if I take that time out, it is checked. And then I can go over to make, and I can actually adapt the query because now we want to make sure that we only do it based on that. And we can go back in here and say, instead of based on the done checkbox, now I would like you to go on the based on sync time to Notion toggle. We need to change this then to the formula one, otherwise it will throw an error. So formula checkbox equals true. Run it one last time to make sure everything works properly. And we should get again the same time back into our Notion workspace once the search module has completed. So let's see. Yes, 0.2 minutes. So again, works like a charm. Again, slightly more complex to set up than the button solution, but you get the advantage that you use this third-party tool that can support several trackers, several team members, right? So if you work with a team, you're not reliant on having only one tracker running at a time. If you have 10 team members, they can all track their time in Toggl synchronously, and then it will all come back into Notion. Now, the drawback is that, again, you need to use this third-party tool, and Toggl only supports the setup on the first paid plan, right? With the free Toggl plan, you can't create tasks. You can only create time entries, which means you can't do the system where you create an entry then in Toggl and do it every time. Instead, what you would need to do is like every time you click on it, it starts it in Toggl. So that is very much not feasible. So if you're on your own and you want to save a bit of money, definitely go for the button solution. If you're in a team and need to work with several people, then go for the Toggl solution. So now you have your time tracked in Notion. The only thing that's missing, an easy way to visualize the data so you can quickly identify key insights. Too bad that Notion doesn't have any built-in charts. Just kidding, I've got you covered. Here are 3 ways to get charts into Notion. And trust me, your Notion workspace will never be the same. Just click here and I'll see you in a second.